Okay, so on this, we are taking some polar coordinates and we're finding the rectangular coordinates. And we use the formula for the relationship between polar coordinates and rectangular coordinates to solve this. So x will equal r cosine of theta and y equals r sine of theta. Since we're starting with polar coordinates are written in r comma theta. So using our formula of x equals r times cosine theta and y equals r times the sine of theta, this will get us 4 times the cosine of pi over 6 and 4 times the sine of pi over 6. So cosine of pi over 6 is the square root of 3 over 2. And the sine of pi over 6 will get us 4 times sine of pi over 6 is 1/2. So here we're going to do some reductions. So 2 goes into 4 twice. So our x value will equal 2 times the square root of 3. And again, 2 will go into 4 twice. And so our y value will be 2. So our final point will be 2 square root of 3, comma 2. On the next problem, we're looking at converting from rectangular to polar. So here we have our x and our y, and we're again using the relationship between them. So our r squared equals x squared plus y squared, and the tangent of theta will equal y over x. So we've got r squared equals x squared plus y squared, and then the tangent of theta will equal y over x. So with r squared equals x squared plus y squared, we're just plugging in our values. So -1 squared plus 1 squared. Anytime we square anything, it's going to become positive. So -1 squared is going to be 1, plus 1 squared is 1. So r squared will equal 2. Taking the square root of both sides, we get r is equal to the square root of 2. And we're looking at the distance, so we're just looking at the square root of 2. With tangent, we are looking at plugging in again our y and our x. So our y value is 1, our x value is -1, so our tangent equals -1. Now, what quadrant are we in? If we plot on a unit circle type of graph here, we plot -1, 1, -1 on the x value and +1 on the y value is going to get us into quadrant 4. The point would plot right about here, which we can see is splitting quadrant 2 directly in half. So our value would be 3 pi over 4. And if you think about here with our terminal points of 3 pi over 4 here on the unit circle itself, our tangent would be -1, and it is also so for the value of what we have. So in this case, our theta is going to be 3 pi over 4. So our point is going to be r theta, so it's going to be the square root of 2, comma, 3 pi over 4. That would be our point here. Now for our last problem, we are finding the product of z1 times z2 and the quotient of z1 divided by z2. Given our z1 and our z2, we're using the multiplication and division of complex numbers here. So if two complex numbers, z1 and z2, have the polar forms, this is what we are going to use as far as our formulas, where we multiply the r's in the multiplication process and add the thetas, and in division we will subtract or divide the r's and subtract our thetas. So to solve this, we are going to have z1 times z2 will be equal to 3 times 2 times the cosine of pi over 3 plus pi over 6 plus I times sine of pi over 3 plus pi over 6. This will get us 6 times cosine. I need to get a common denominator here. My common denominator will be 6, so 2 pi over 6 plus pi over 6 plus the I sign of 2 pi over 6 plus pi over 6. Gotta have common denominators to add our fractions. So let's look at a 6 times the cosine. Here we have 2 pi plus 1 pi will get us 3 pi over 6. Plus I sine, again we'll have 2 plus 1 is 3 pi over 6. And now we want to reduce that fraction. So 6 times cosine of pi over 2 plus I sine of pi over 2. So that solves our multiplication. Now we're looking at our division. So now we've got z sub 1 divided by z sub 2. So that's going to get us 3 divided by 2 times the cosine of pi over 3 minus pi over 6 plus I times sine of pi over 3 minus pi over 6. So this will get us 3 halves. Again, we have to get our common denominator, so this will be 2 pi over 6 minus pi over 6 plus I sine of 2 pi over 6 minus pi over 6. So this will get us 3 halves. Cosine 2 minus 1 will get us 1 pi over 6 plus I sine 2 minus 1 will get us pi over 6. Now, if this had been the other way around and we would have gotten a negative pi over 6, remember on cosine we have even functions and the negative will disappear. And here, with sine being an odd function, the negative would have moved out front. So make sure you pay attention to that.